It's time for another Tiny Leaders Deck Tech and gameplay. Today we're bringing a gun to a knife fight. It's a walking ballista mirror. We've got Sythis Harvest Hand versus Heliod Suncrowned. There's going to be a full match at the end of this Deck Tech, so if you'd like to skip ahead, go to this timestamp. Let's get into it. First off, Sythis Harvest Hand. Calling it a walking ballista deck is a bit reductive. It's really more of an enchantress deck that just happens to win with a walking ballista. We actually have multiple routes to victory, all of which revolve around the primary synergy of using enchantress effects to draw lots of cards. Sythis herself is an amazing commander. Having an enchantress in the zone for just 2 mana is incredibly valuable. Being an enchantment creature herself means she will trigger other enchantress effects in your deck as well, which is a very powerful quality to have on demand in the command zone. She also comes with a life gain trigger, which is not irrelevant. The first and most straightforward route to end the game is the infinite combo with Heliod Suncrowned and Walking Ballista. Relying on a 2-card infinite combo when both singleton pieces start in your deck is tough, but it's easier to do with some handy tutors in your deck like Enlightened Tutor, Worldly Tutor, or the activation of a Sterling Grove. Or when you draw as many cards as Sythis, you often just draw into it naturally. Heliod is also decent without a gun. Of course, being an enchantment is ideal, but we also have a life gain trigger in the command zone to synergize. Our other big combo is locking out games with solitary confinement. We can effectively negate the downside with the volume of cards we draw, and it can be recycled with Hall of Heliod's Generosity. For lots of decks, especially mono red, solitary confinement is a death sentence. Our last way to end the game is just by attacking. And Destiny Spinner is a great way to get there. This card has so much text on it. Making everything uncounterable is already great, but it can turn our lands into huge trampling units with haste. Rancor, Ethereal Armor, and Spirit Mantle are cream of the crop auras to buff up our units and push damage. Rancor is especially powerful by being able to pick itself up and be replayed to re-trigger our enchantresses. We're not going super deep on auras in this deck, mostly because it's a bad card type. It's definitely possible to do Sythis auras, but it requires reformatting the entire deck. For Enchantress effects outside the zone, we have Argothian, Cetacean Champion, and Enchantress's Presence. These are essential to generating advantage since our cards are kinda bad in a vacuum. Looking at our other creatures, we have Allseed of Life's Bounty as a cheap enchantment, and the activated ability is relevant because it's very important that we protect our engine. Birds and Delighted Halfling are there for mana dorks. Sanctum Weaver is a dork that usually wins when you untap with it. Skyclave Apparition is just a tiny staple. If you're not familiar, commanders briefly touch the zone they're sent to before returning to the command zone as a state-based action. Because of that, Skyclave is unable to track the commanders once they've left exile, so when Skyclave leaves the battlefield, it's unable to check the mana cost and no token is created. In other words, Skyclave is a flexible removal piece that kills anything in the format, comes with a body, and kills commanders at a profit. We have a fat pile of removal, basically running every kill spell we can get. Ossification and On Thin Ice ask us to run a decent number of basics, which is not a big deal for a 2-color deck. And then our biggest pile naturally is our enchantments. Sterling Grove is easily one of our best cards. Mass Shroud is very, very good for the deck because our biggest weakness is having the engine broken up before we can get going. Plus, it comes with an Enlightened Tutor to boot. Abundant Growth, Wild Growth, and Utopia Sprawl are all comparable land enchantments, drawing cards, ramping, and fixing mana in various permutations. Any playable 1-mana enchantments we can get our hands on to cycle and draw cards. Exploration fills a similar function, of course allowing us to accelerate early, and is especially helpful once your hand starts filling up. Restoration of Eiganjo and the Huntsman's Redemption are both solid sagas. It's no Fable of the Mirror Breaker, but damn if sagas aren't just good cards. Eiganjo can ensure land drops and put 2 drops into play from the graveyard or functionally from the hand, and the Huntsman's Redemption comes with a friend and is able to tutor on its second chapter to help put together a combo. Our lands are pretty typical, making sure not to run any tapped lands. The maximum competitive version of this deck has a Sarah's Sanctum in it plus a Crop Rot to go get it, but personally when we are playing in paper we don't bother, because it's kinda lame to proxy a $3,000 card when you're just playing over beers. Sideboards are obviously meta dependent, but in general there's a few good sideboard cards that are also enchantments, and there's lots of ways to run better protection based on the deck you're playing against. Next, let's talk about Heliod. The bulk of the work on this deck was done by my friend Arjun, so shoutouts to my big papa. The Sauce is a Soul Sisters Shell, creature-based aggro combo deck. If you're not familiar, Soul Sisters is an ancient modern archetype named after Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant. It's also a song by Train, who also sings Drops of Jupiter, and Jupiter is the god of the sky, chief deity of the Roman pantheon, which Heliod, being the god of the sun and head of the Therosian pantheon, is based on. And oh my god, it's all connected. It's a walking ballista. The Sauce is a much more combo-focused deck than Sythis. Having one half of your infinite combo in the command zone reduces the hurdles to combo significantly. But it's not just combo or bust. One of Heliod's greatest strengths is its ability to play multiple angles. We're more than capable of attacking our way through games. People vastly underestimate Heliod's triggered ability. Our Soul Sisters shell gives us tons of separate life gain triggers, which will all convert into tons of separate 1/1 counter triggers. This allows us to pad out our life totals, which is important because it lets us play aggressively without having to hold back blockers. So let's talk about our commander. Heliod has a lot going on with him. A good chunk of time he's not actually a creature, he's just an indestructible enchantment. This can be helpful at times to dodge removal in certain matchups. Getting Heliod online is great for our beatdown plan, because not a lot of decks in Tiny are ready to fight a 5/5 indestructible. Of course, he also has the triggered ability our deck is built around, and the activated ability our deck is also built around. This lifelink is good for more than just Ballista though, it's just generally good when you can use it. Let's take a look at our deck, starting with non-creatures, of which we only have 10. Laydown Arms, Swords, Path, and March are about all the removal we can muster. We would love to run more, but being monocolor means we can only get so far without diluting card quality. Recommission is a super flexible res spell that has the benefit of granting 1/1 counters. That means it's able to pick up dead walking ballista that other res spells can't. Brave is here to protect our team or set up for alpha strikes. Orm's Chant is there to protect our combo or occasionally just as a time walk. E-Tutor is there to fetch ballista, but it also can grab Ancient Den in a pickle or one of our other artifacts, such as Aether Vial, which is very good in a deck that has 23 creatures, or Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which is a super fun card to play with. If you stick a ballista under it, you usually win because every creature is suddenly a walking ballista. But we have a ton of other activated abilities to jam under it as well, such as Moms or Allseed. And you don't know true power until your Ranger Captain of Eosing every single turn. Let's look at the creatures. We have a deep Soul Sisters package. These effects are very good for us. Our deck is built around gaining life and playing creatures, so naturally we're playing all the playable ones we can. Ranger Captain and Recruiter can both search for walking ballista, they can grab a good chunk of the rest of our deck too, and Ranger Captain protects our combo. Spectrum Sentinel has some decent words on him, and it gives you a free card to side out when you're playing against monocolored decks. Esper Sentinel is a generically good card. Mother and Giver of Runes are there as permanent members of the white creature deck staples. Ajani's Pridemate and the dude Ajani tells him not to worry about are there mostly to eat removal spells and threaten lethal when they do go unanswered. Knight of White Orchid ramps, has first strike, and has relevant devotion count. Grand Abolisher protects our combo. Thalia is great in a deck that only has 10 non-creature spells. Extraction Specialist can pick up valuable creatures, which is particularly good if you pick up creatures that weren't going to attack or block anyway, such as Moms. Plus, having lifelink is not irrelevant. Linden is our best creature when we're on an aggro game plan. Her and one other unit gets Heliod online, and those attack triggers all happen separately, which creates a ton of power with Heliod in play. Skyclave is just a damn good card, and White Plume Adventurer is a mistake. For lands, we have Ancient Dens simply as an Enlightened Tutor target. Nykthos is essential in our monocolor deck that's packed with devotion. The pair of Iganjos are pretty free, even if the castle isn't very relevant. This could be a basic if you want to play around Wasteland. I think I've activated this card like maybe twice ever. Castle Ardenvale is mostly free to include as well, and sometimes you get to make a dude. Ancient Tomb is the nuts. It moves our combo clock up by a turn, and even just playing Heliod on turn 2 is good enough. And Rogue's Passage is a bit suspicious, but I swear by this card. The number of games I've won just by sneaking a dude through blockers every turn would surprise you. Our deck has a habit of gumming up the board, which often means there's some gumming happening across from you as well. Rogue's Passage can break that stalemate in your favor. For sideboards, we don't have anything too fancy. The deck's biggest weakness is having your little guys killed off, so packing a Surge of Salvation or other similar effect is a good idea. Past that, I like to favor effects that are attached to creatures like Dranith and Phyrexian Revoker. And now that we've met our decks, let's jump into a game. Fish's opening hand contains a Spectrum Sentinel, Esper Sentinel, Thalia, Daxos, Castle Ardenvale, Rogue's Passage, and a basic Plains. Spencer's opening hand contains Exploration, Satyr Enchanter, March of Otherworldly Light, Restoration of Iganjo, Enlightened Tutor, a Windswept Heath, and a Forest. Spencer starts us off with a fetch land, finding Temple Garden untapped. He plays an Exploration. He plays a Forest as his second land, then passes. Fish draws. They play a Plains and an Esper Sentinel. They pass. Spencer untaps and draws. He plays Sythis from the command zone and passes the turn. Fish draws for turn. He plays a Plains. He taps 2 for Thalia. They pass. Spencer draws. He plays a Forest. He plays March of Otherworldly Light, exiling Enlightened Tutor, targeting Thalia, and paying 1 for Esper Sentinel. He attacks for 1. Spencer passes. Fish untaps and draws. They play Castle Ardenvale. They play Daxos and follow it up with Spectrum Sentinel, gaining 1 life. Fish attacks for 1 with the Esper Sentinel and passes the turn. Spencer draws for turn. He plays Restoration of Iganjo, gaining a life and drawing a card. Esper Sentinel triggers and Fish draws. Restoration enters and Spencer searches his library for a plains, which he plays. He plays On Thin Ice, exiling Esper Sentinel, gaining a life and drawing a card. He passes. Fish untaps and draws. He plays a Rogue's Passage. He taps 3 for Heliod from the command zone, then attacks with Daxos for 2. Spencer declares no blocks. Fish passes and on Spencer's upkeep casts Path to Exile, targeting Sythis. Spencer finds a plains tapped, then draws for turn. Saga triggers and Spencer discards Worldly Tutor and returns Windswept Heath to play tapped. Spencer plays a Heliod and passes the turn. Fish untaps and draws. He plays a plains. He plays Linden and gains 1 life from Daxos, triggering Heliod and giving the Sentinel a 1/1 counter. They go to combat and attack with the team. Linden triggers 3 times, which triggers Heliod 3 times, and Fish distributes counters. Spencer has no blocks and goes to 3 life. They pass. Spencer draws. Restoration flips, then Spencer plays Walking Ballista and combos Fish to death. Between games, Spencer adds Stony Silence, Pithing Needle, and Hex Drinker. He takes out Soul Snare, Enlightened Tutor, and Worldly Tutor. Fish adds Mirren Crusader and Heliod's Intervention. He takes out Spectrum Sentinel and Extraction Specialist. Fish's opening hand contains Esper Sentinel, Thalia, Swords to Plowshares, Enlightened Tutor, Ancient Den, and 2 basic planes. Spencer's opening hand contains Delighted Halfling, Destiny Spinner, Ossification, March of Otherworldly Light, Temple Garden, and 2 forests. Fish is on the play and starts with a plains and an Esper Sentinel. They pass. Spencer draws and plays a Temple Garden untapped and plays Delighted Halfling. He passes. Fish draws for turn. They play a plains and a Thalia. They pass. Spencer untaps and draws. He plays a forest and taps 3 to play Ossification. Fish draws off Esper Sentinel and Spencer passes. Fish untaps and draws. They play an Ancient Den. They play a White Plume Adventurer and seize the initiative, adding a basic to hand. Fish gets in for 1 and passes the turn, untapping Esper Sentinel on Spencer's upkeep. Then Spencer draws for turn. He plays Sythis from the command zone. He plays Ethereal Armor, gaining a life and drawing a card. Fish draws off Esper Sentinel. Spencer plays a plains for turn and passes. Fish untaps and gets 2 1/1 counters from initiative on his upkeep. He draws. He plays an Ancient Tomb. Fish casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting Sythis. Spencer gains 4 life. Fish taps Ancient Tomb to cast Heliod. They attack for 6 and pass the turn, untapping White Plume on Spencer's upkeep. Spencer draws. He plays a Horizon Canopy. He casts March of Otherworldly Light, exiling White Plume Adventure. Fish draws off Esper Sentinel. Spencer attacks with the Halfling and takes the initiative. He searches for a forest and passes the turn. On the end step, Fish casts Enlightened Tutor and searches for Walking Ballista, putting it on top of their library. They untap and draw, and play Walking Ballista for game. In Game 3, Fish's opening hand contains Daxos, Heliod's Intervention, Recruiter of the Guard, Castle Ardenvale, and 3 basic planes. Spencer's hand has a Delighted Halfling, Wild Growth, Sanctum Weaver, Restoration of Iganjo, Hall of Heliod's Generosity, Temple Garden, and a basic planes. Spencer starts off with a Temple Garden untapped and a Delighted Halfling. He passes the turn. Fish draws. He plays a plains and an Aether Vial. He passes. Spencer draws for turn. He plays a plains, then casts Restoration of Iganjo and finds a basic plains. He passes. Fish untaps and puts a counter on Aether Vial. They play Castle Ardenvale, then cast Daxos. They pass the turn. Spencer untaps and draws. Restoration gets a counter, and Spencer discards Argothian Enchantress, then returns it to the battlefield tapped. He casts Sythis and draws a card. Spencer plays a plains. He casts Wild Growth on the plains, drawing 2 cards and gaining a life. Then he casts Sanctum Weaver, drawing again and gaining another life. He passes. Fish puts a counter on Aether Vial, then draws for turn. He plays a plains, then taps 3 for Heliod. They pass. Spencer untaps and draws. Restoration triggers and flips. Spencer casts Ossification, exiling Daxos. He draws 2 and gains a life. He taps Sanctum Weaver for 5 green mana. He plays Enchantress's Presence, drawing and gaining a life. He plays Sterling Grove and draws 3. Then he plays a Birds of Paradise. He goes to combat and gets in for 2. Then he moves to cleanup and discards 3 lands. Fish untaps, gives Aether Violet's 3rd counter, then draws for turn. They play Agatha's Soul Cauldron. They play Ballista for 0, which dies as a state-based action. They activate Aether Vial to put Recruiter of the Guard into play, which tutors for Mirren Crusader. Fish activates Agatha's Soul Cauldron to exile Walking Ballista and attempting to put a 1/1 counter on Recruiter of the Guard. Spencer responds by exiling the Recruiter with Swords to Plowshares. Fish gains 1 and misses the Heliod trigger. Foiled for now, they pass the turn. Spencer untaps and draws. He sacrifices Sterling Grove to search his library and put Destiny Spinner on top. He taps Sanctum Weaver for 6 green and casts Spirit Mantle on the Architect, drawing 3 cards. He casts Exploration and draws another 3 cards. He plays Horizon Canopy. He plays Destiny Spinner, drawing 3 more. He plays Pithing Needle and names Heliod. He activates Destiny Spinner, turning his planes into a 9/9, then goes to combat and attacks for 13, making a 1/1 Spirit. He goes to clean up and discards 4 lands. Fish draws for turn. He plays a Soul Warden. He activates Aether Vial to put Mirrored Crusader into play, gaining a life and giving Mirrored Crusader a 1/1 counter. He activates Nykthos for 4 mana, then casts Heliod's Intervention for 1, targeting Pithing Needle. Spencer responds by paying 3 to March the Cauldron, exiling it. Then Pithing Needle is destroyed. Defeated, Fish passes the turn, and Spencer attacks Fish for 27 to win the game. That's the end of this video. If you want to see more tiny deck techs and gameplays, let me know, because I'm more than happy to make them. If you're craving more tiny content, I've been writing monthly tournament reports on my Ko-fi blog, so you can go see what the community is up to. If you want to play in those leagues, they start around the beginning of every month, and they're hosted in our Discord. Hopefully I'll see you in there.